I'm normally very sympathetic to the pleas of modders who are unfairly treated when companies DMCA them for no good reason. But this is one of those scenarios where I'm like, yeah, the modder completely screwed up here, and their inability to admit their wrongdoing and just adhere to basic guidelines, that all paves the road to a situation where the modder was kind of asking for this situation. I'm referring to everything going on right now with Luke Ross, who is a modder who kind of specializes in implementing VR features in games that don't normally support them. Back in 2022, we got this Verge article where it stated that this modder was making roughly $20,000 a month, bringing the biggest games to VR. Money earned through this individual's Patreon page, which looks something like this. But scrolling down, you'll find that now if you look at his About section of his Patreon page, you'll find the following message. Beware. Due to DMCA notices received from CD Projekt and 505 Games, I am forced to temporarily pause the Patreon page. You can still subscribe if you want to support me, but be advised that for the moment, there will be no benefits available, no access to the 40-plus mods or detailed information about my VR conversions until the legal situation clears out. Again, normally I'm fully against companies moving against modders when they're making their content for free. But where the situation with Luke Ross differs is that he was profiting from his mods, and the payment aspect wasn't optional. Luke Ross forced people to subscribe to his Patreon for them to gain access to his VR mods, which effectively means that his mods were completely paywalled, and in turn, he was directly profiting from essentially someone else's IP. Now, Luke Ross had the following to say on January 20th, 2026, in response to this DMCA that was received, quote, CD Projekt decided that they would follow in Take-Two Interactive Software's steps and issued a DMCA notice against me for the removal of the Cyberpunk 2077 VR mod. Now, I would say that's a mischaracterization of events because Take-Two Interactive takes down even mods that are available for free, whereas CD Projekt does allow and encourage modders to go ham as long as they're not charging for those mods, and that's the rule that Luke Ross broke. He continues, it amounted to the same ironclad corporal logic. Every little action that a company takes is in the name of money, but everything that modders do must be absolutely for free. They stretch the concept of derivative work until it's paper thin, as though a system that allows visualizing 40-plus games in fully immersive 3D VR was somehow built making use of their intellectual property. And as usual, they give absolutely zero fucks about how playing their game in VR made people happy, and they cannot just be grateful about the extra copies of the title they sold because of that without ever having to pour money into producing an official conversion. Am I a little bitter about all this? Yeah, you bet I am, especially in the same week when Meta pulls the plug on 3 major VR studios, especially after 4 years during which I, together with other modders, spent so much time keeping our mods alive in spite of CDPR's constant breaking updates, especially when they never even knew or cared during all this time that the VR conversion was there and are only knee-jerk reacting now because somebody reported to them that it existed and was not free. Basically, he's saying that CD Projekt is very greedy for this, for not allowing modders to profit off of their mods, and saying that his mods are not CD Projekt's intellectual property because it's its own software that has a framework that allows VR to work on all of the games that he makes this framework compatible with. But the thing is, to utilize this VR mod, you still need the original games that they run on to turn those games into VR compatible. And the reason your mod is popular is because it takes an existing game that belongs to somebody else or to another entity and converts that into something that can be played with VR. Any modder could say the same thing. They could say the unique code that I wrote for this mod for this game does not belong to the company that created this game, but the mod itself derives from the original work and can only function with the original work that doesn't belong to the modder. And so there's always strict rules on the part of just about every video game that encourages mods that basically says you can modify the game all you want as long as you're not charging for them, as long as you're not fully paywalling them. Optional donations is one thing, but mandatory payment to obtain mods, that's always been a big no-no. Like if you want to charge for your mods, you have to get direct permission from the company that made the game you are modding. Otherwise, your mods have to be put out there for free because you're not creating something entirely unique from scratch. You're building off of someone else's work. And if you sell that stuff, then that gets into murky waters. Luke Ross did eventually get a response from CD Projekt Red, specifically the VP of Business Development, who had the following response to give, and I think it's pretty reasonable what they said. Quote, I'd like to briefly address the discussion around the Cyberpunk VR mod created by Luke Ross. We have indeed issued a DMCA strike, as it was available as a paid mod only accessible to Patreon subscribers. It wasn't an optional donation, it was a requirement for customers to pay in order to obtain this mod that has been built to work with a game that is not theirs. This directly violates our fan content guidelines. We never allow monetization of our IP without our direct permission and or an agreement in place. We were in touch with Luke last week and informed him that he needs to make it free for everyone with optional donations or remove it. We are big fans of mods to our games. Some of the work out there has been nothing short of amazing, including Luke's mod for Cyberpunk 2077. We'd be happy to see it return as a free release. However, making a profit from our IP in any form always requires permission from CD Projekt Red, which is a reasonable ask. The spirit of modding has always been the community coming together in order to make a game better or, overhaul a game or make it work differently in certain aspects and have this communal aspect drive the longevity of a beloved game. And all of that can only really happen when that content is available for free. Now, the spirit of modding is one thing, but legally speaking, it's just precarious when you start making work that is derivative of something that exists and then start selling that, and you're directly using someone else's IP and their brand and their name and their work in order to benefit from something that is, sure, like an addition on top of what foundation already exists, but that foundation is the core of why that mod is possible in the first place. So once you start profiting off of that, yeah, it's going to make the developers of the original work feel kind of like, hey, that feels a little like you're kind of taking advantage of our work. That feels like you're taking our product and doing business with it. Not only is there a general sentiment that paid mods shouldn't really be a thing that becomes widely normalized, but there's also the sentiment of like, yeah, companies and development studios and creators have a right to say that if you want to take my work and then do derivative things on top of it, just make sure it's free and don't profit off of like my IP, the thing that I built. Not long after Jen Rosner's statement here from CD Projekt Red, Luke Ross responded with the following. Thank you, Jan. I'm sorry, but I don't believe you're within your rights in demanding that my software needs to be free. Luke Ross insists here that it is not derivative work or fan content. It supports a large number of games which were built upon different engines, and it contains absolutely zero code or assets from your IP. But again, to actually run this mod and make it functional with Cyberpunk 2077, you need the video game Cyberpunk 2077. That's still the foundation of why the mod works in the first place. This continues saying that it infringes your IP rights is equivalent to maintaining, for example, that RivaTuner violates game publishers' copyrights because it intercepts the images the game is drawing on screen and it processes them in order to overlay its statistics. But as the community noted through this community comment, quote, RivaTuner is freeware and offers universal support to games with rarely any need to patch the software for support, nor does it target any game IP. RivaTuner doesn't need to be made compatible with a specific game. It's a software that just works universally. It's not tied to any one game or IP. So it's not technically a mod, it's a utility software. And even if it were a mod, the fact that it's free means that it has a lot more like leeway to be able to be attached to specific IPs because it wouldn't be directly profiting off of those IPs. And yeah, people are not sympathetic to Luke Ross in this particular scenario. In the responses, you'll find people saying things like, this makes no sense. What you're making are modifications to company-owned IPs. Your entire argument here is hinging on, well, technically, it's not a mod if I really stretch out the definition. Your Patreon and mod would literally not exist if it was just some software. 100% true. Just because your mod was built to support multiple games does not make it universal. The mod still only supports specific games because you tailored your software to work with the foundational aspect of the those specific games. Somebody else right here posted, imagine how wrong you must be for people to be siding with the large corporation sending a takedown notice to a mod. And that's because CD Projekt has always been very reasonable when it comes to dealing with modders and giving them free reign over mods. The one big stipulation is don't profit off of it unless we give you express permission. And again, that's just always been a thing since the modding scene got big. That's just the one thing that companies ask when they allow for modders to do their thing. And not to mention, there's just a general sentiment in the gaming community that paid mods suck, or as this individual puts it, paid mods are cancer. You're no better than Technopair to me, to be honest. Donations are fine. Locking mods behind paywalls is stupid. I don't work for free. Well, don't do it then. Yeah, plenty of other modders do work for free and put the option out there for optional donations. But, you know, at the end of the day, they do it out of sheer passion. And that's kind of what the modding scene is ultimately about. It's not about profiting off of an existing game. And if you want to make money off of your skills, then like apply for game development jobs or make your own game or show off what you got without having to utilize someone else's video game to make your software and then have to sell that software. And yeah, I mean, the fact that Luke Ross here only has 400 some likes, but you know, way more replies here, essentially getting ratioed by the community, really highlights that people are not on board with what Luke Ross is doing here. He tried to respond again by saying that, with all that said, I'm all for finding a win-win solution that makes it possible for your fans to keep enjoying Night City from the inside in VR, but at the same time without causing harm to our respective interests. I said that in 2022 when we contacted you with a proposal of making the mod official, or at least sanctioned by your company, and I said the same last week when we spoke, almost 4 years later. I think the current state of affairs is not the best way to resolve this misunderstanding. But the win-win scenario that Luke Ross is proposing is, as long as I get to profit directly off of your game through my mod, then everyone wins, without causing harm to our respective interests, says Luke Ross. But CD Projekt doesn't need to be concerned with your ability to profit off of a mod that utilizes CD Projekt's game. Luke Ross acts as if CD Projekt not accepting his proposal of let's work something out where I can profit is somehow like a really shitty move on the part of CD Projekt, when that's just the standard. Once again, Luke Ross gets ratioed here, only 77 likes compared to 120 responses, with top comments saying things like, you make $20,000 a month on mods, more than most game developers earn. You should be grateful they're not taking you to court for damages. They're giving you a literal chance to republish the mod with optional donations. That's the thing. CD Projekt is actually being very generous and kind to Luke Ross under the circumstances, giving Luke Ross the chance to release his mod as long as it meets certain guidelines, like don't directly profit, don't fully paywall your mod, make the ability to pay for the mod optional, make it donations, optional donations, and then you're free to go. Like, it's just a couple steps. And Luke Ross is still being persistent about his way being the right way, which is I get to directly profit off of my mod. The mod that only works with those specific games that this software supports as a foundation. But Luke Ross seemingly refuses to budge because in a statement to IGN that was relayed on January 21st, 2026, Luke Ross only doubled down on his stance, saying that I do not rule out releasing the mod free for everyone, but it would take time because my software supports 40 plus games and various completely different engines, which makes creating a version that specifically supports only Cyberpunk 2077 a non-trivial task. And then this is the part that gets me when he says, also the people who have voluntarily given their money to me in order to support my development efforts for the framework might not be happy about seeing the mod being given away all of a sudden to everyone just because I've been bullied into it. Like, yes, they voluntarily paid for the mod, but the payment itself wasn't really voluntary because the mod was paywalled. The payment had to happen for the mod to be downloaded. If you had provided a free option with optional donations, then you could fully say that the choice to donate to you was voluntary, but people were forced to pay to be able to download this mod that offered this VR experience. But he's saying here that, well, people who have already paid money for this suddenly finding out that the mod has gone free wouldn't be happy. Well, that's kind of a hole that you dug for yourself by charging for this mod, by engaging in paid mods. That's the risk that you run when you do that. Like, there is a chance that you get DMCAed and that you will be forced to release your mod for free after having charged people money to download your mod. And then he talks about how people in response to this whole situation have taken to essentially just like pirating his mod. He says that anyway, it's kind of a moot point because following the unexpected DMCA strike after the mod was forcibly removed from my Patreon, people afraid of losing VR support for their favorite games have started pirating and illegally exchanging the mod all over the internet, brazenly saying that since I was not complying with CDPR's terms of service, my work is now fair game and I should be punished by having it stolen. So in a sense, CDPR already got what they wanted. People are basically sending a message. They're basically saying this mod should have never been paywalled in the first place, so now we're going to make it a point to ensure that this software is free for everyone. They're doing it because they don't agree with Luke Ross's stance, and so they are rebelling against Luke Ross's attempt to justify the fact that he charged for this mod by distributing this mod for free and basically going, this is how it should be. Social media response against him has been very scathing, with some people saying things like, without the game, the mod is useless. I'm glad some people have found ways to pirate his shitty mods. He deserves it. So he's not really won many favors on the internet. Even the kinder responses have been very emphatic about the fact that in this scenario, Luke Ross is wrong. So Emerald Apple, for example, in response to this whole situation said, if he had created a generic program that turns any game into a VR experience, then he could have sold it. A standalone software that can launch any game with a custom configuration. The fact that this particular mod needs the base game, or base games rather, all the games that it supports, the fact that it needs those base games for each specific VR mod means it uses assets from the base game code, at which point you cannot make a profit off of it. Couldn't have put it better myself. And then this whole situation gained so much traction that other developers and publishers who have now become aware of Luke Ross's mod have taken to DMCAing him as well, finding out that he was essentially charging for the VR mods. Right here we have someone on the virtual reality subreddit posting the following email sent out to Patreon subscribers. And among the sentences here is this one that reads, fast forward to today and another publisher just sent a DMCA takedown notice to Patreon, namely 505 Games, for my VR conversion of Ghost Runner. Because of the legal threats that he has already received and the potential of future looming legal threats, Luke Ross ultimately decided that he would make all versions of his VR mod unavailable, and also all of the posts related to the wonderful work we have done here together for years, so that there will be no ground for further claims. Basically, he's shutting down operations for now until he figures out what to do next. And I think what he should do next should simply be make mods available for free and then have optional donations. That literally will solve all your problems. Sure, you won't be making as much money, but you never had the grounds to make that money in the first place under the circumstances in which you released and, paywalled and sold your mods. He also talks about how DMCA law is often abused and how the way it's worded gives infinite power to big companies. And I actually don't disagree with that. I have seen corporations abuse DMCA law to take down work of others that have been put out there for free as a labor of love. But again, in this particular scenario where people are directly profiting off of mods without permission, that's DMCA law actually used properly on the part of entities who created work that someone else is profiting off of through derivative work. Luke Ross also complains about the way CD Projekt words their fan content guidelines, the modding guidelines, where they say that people who make mods are allowed to accept reasonable donations for their mods. And then he asks, but what is reasonable technically? Is it $20,000 a month? Is it $50,000 a month? But in Luke Ross's scenario, it's a moot point because the money that he's been earning through Patreon were not optional donations. You had to subscribe, you had to pay, you had to shell out money in order to download these VR mods. So the fact that Luke Ross is still trying to frame himself as the victim in this scenario is just something that has not been going down well with the gaming community. Even the most ardent supporters of VR in this virtual reality subreddit, you've got people criticizing what Luke Ross did. With responses to this email that Luke Ross sent to Patreon subscribers, on Reddit reading as follows: wouldn't making his mod free and accepting optional donations make him bulletproof to all claims? Guy wants so bad to make some nice cash out of this and got so upset that he's not even considering alternative business models. He just said, fuck it. So yeah, it just paints Luke Ross as someone whose top priority is to profit off of mods rather than to give people something really cool to overhaul their experience of a video game that they love, which is what the spirit of modding is more about. So Luke Ross has not only like desecrated the spirit of modding, quote unquote, but legally speaking, he's also done something that even like people who hate corporations can look at this situation and be like, in this case, yeah. In this case, the modder kind of fucked up. The modder fucked around and found out because they charged for the mods, which is just not something that has ever really been okay. That is unless you receive express permission from the original creators of the original work from which you're creating derivative work like mods. So yeah, I don't know. This is something that's been spreading across the internet. And in the past, I've covered plenty of situations where companies were unfair in the way they DMCA'd people's work, even though that work was done, for free and just put out there and only helps further bolster the games of corporations who issued those DMCAs. But this is one of those few scenarios where I do think that the modder was in the wrong, where I think the modder fucked around and found out, where I think the corporation kind of had every right to like issue the DMCA takedown that they did, especially when they continue to provide reasonable options, like just release your mod for free with optional donations and we'll give you free reign over your mod and your distribution of it. Like that's all CD Projekt Red is asking. They're not saying never publish this mod, like we're going to tank your work. They're just saying just like follow our guidelines and specific conditions surrounding profiting. But that's one man's take. I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole situation. Do you think Luke Ross was unfairly treated by CD Projekt Red? Or do you think in this scenario, Luke Ross was in the wrong and CD Projekt was in the right to take the actions that they did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.